Botafogo are your reigning Libertadores champions, but the phrase heavy is the head that wears the crown couldn't be more fitting. So will another Brazilian team pick up the trophy, or will we see some argy-bargy along the way in 2025? Now, of course, altitude will play its part in the depths of Bolivia and Ecuador, but don't rule out any tricky trips to Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay. This is the Copper Club podcast, proudly sponsored by Player Stats, and this is our 2025 Copa Libertadores preview. I'll be your host, Nathan Joyce, and I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Robinson. Tom, good to have you back on the podcast for arguably the most exciting one of the season, of the year, the Copa Libertadores preview. How are we doing?
Yeah, always good. Always looking forward to chatting about Libertadores. I think it's still my favourite tournament out there. And yeah, like you said, at this stage, there's just so many unknowns. It's full of promise before the inevitable Brazilian team winning it. So, we can live in hope that we've got something a bit different at this stage. But yeah, looking forward to going through because it's always, a pretty wild ride.
You've almost spoiled it already. We're going to try and drive up the other teams, and you've just said that Brazilian teams are going to win it. Look, we know they've dominated for so many years now, and if we look at the top of the betting market, just to give a bit more context to this, Flamengo, your 4-1 favourites, followed by Palmeiras 9-2, Botafogo, your reigning champions 13-2. But then some Argentinian teams come into it. River Plate at a generous 8. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Racing 17-2, Sao Paulo 9-1, International 10-1, and then the rest bar. So let's start with Group A, which consists of Brazilian and reigning champions Botafogo, Argentinian outfit Estudiantes, Universidad de Chile, and Venezuelan outfit Carabobo. We're probably going to focus more on Botafogo and Estudiantes. So let's start with the reigning champions. I've sort of teed up my intro, which you haven't heard yet, Tom, but basically saying that I don't quite fancy them this year. A lot has happened, which is a little bit upsetting because it looked as though John Textor was building a really nice sort of team there. Artur Jorge has left and gone to Al Rayyan. Luis Enrique has gone to Zenit, quite controversially, and Thiago Almada has finally got his wish and he's at Lyon in Europe. And some big players have left, and then also some fringe players as well. When I say fringe players, Junior Santos, who scored the winner, has gone against Mineiro in the final, has actually moved to Mineiro, and he was the Libertadores top goal scorer last year. So this squad, where it looked almost as if, hang on, there might be some challenges against Flamengo and Palmeiras in the Brazilian league, as well as the Libertadores, has been pulled apart, and they're heading into this tournament as third favourites according to the bookmakers. I think that's a little bit unknown about their situation. But Tom, new manager for them, what are you expecting from them? Because potentially they should be getting out of this group, but long term, do you think they have an opportunity to make it back-to-back titles?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to do back-to-back titles in the Libertadores. Obviously, Palmeiras did it fairly recently in 2020-21, but apart from that, it is very rare. That's one of the beautiful things about this tournament. You get, even if perhaps it's dominated currently by Brazilians, you at least get different teams winning it. Botafogo themselves winning it last year was a great storyline. I mean, I still think they're going to be strong. They're going to get through this group, no problem. But like you said, it's not necessarily that they are weaker. It's more a case that they're just a very different team. So I think that's the unknown, because you look at some of the players they've brought in. Santi Rodriguez from New York City FC, he's been tearing up the MLS and is just generally a really talented player. You've got Nathan Fernandez, very good young player. Jair coming in from Santos, great promising centre back. Artur, Jefinho, there's some real talent there, and I think someone like Ruan Cruz is coming in from Bulgaria. Is he going to fill that void that's left? Who knows? It's just, I think, too much change. It probably means that at this stage it's hard for us to really say, this team is going to really be one of the strong contenders. The thing about the Libertadores, it takes place over a long period of time. it's almost like a tournament of two halves in a way of like, just get through to the knockout rounds. You might have a chance to reinforce at that point, a bit like Botafogo did last year. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't see them among the favourites, but I still think they're probably going to be in amongst it. But yeah, very interesting that there has been that much fluctuation, given the money that's around them.
I'm glad you brought that up, because last season I think they lost their first couple of games and it looked as if they were heading out of the group stage before Artur Jorge finally came in. It was a later appointment than what they wanted, bringing in Renato Paiva, a little bit of an unknown quantity. He's done okay in Mexico with a couple of clubs, but I think a lot of Botafogo fans were disappointed because he was brought into the Bahia project to sort of lead that charge, and really disappointed in Brazil. But the names which were being floated about to take the job, Roberto Mancini, Rafa Benitez, I don't know if what John Textor was smoking when he was trying to make those managers his top priority on his list. He was never going to get those sort of caliber. So we don't know. I don't know too much about Paiva and his techniques, to be honest with you. So I think gone from Artur Jorge, who wanted to play this free-flowing football and almost have five across the front line, and it sort of caught teams out. And I think a lot of fans are just a bit underwhelmed and coming into this a little bit cautious. It's gone from a high expectations and where can we go now to very much sort of quite a bleak outlook on it. So I agree with you. I don't think there's going to be a problem getting out of the group, but I think there's a couple more Brazilian teams which are going to be stronger than Botafogo. Estudiantes, Tom, we spoke about them about a month ago on the podcast because they've been in the headlines for all different kinds of reasons at the moment. A fairly strong start to life in Argentina. What do you make of the squad and also everything which is going on behind the scenes? Because it's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, super interesting. Something that's like, a sort of existential question at the core of Argentinian football, really, of the whole, sad question of private money coming in, memberships, the whole structure of what is brilliant about Argentinian football being sort of questioned and under debate. So yeah, the Foster Gillette drama swirling around the club, it's definitely been one of the most interesting storylines ahead of the Argentinian season. But I think they've reinforced well with Medina, Alario. They've got a pretty solid team that is it's not necessarily going to blow teams away, but beating or winning the Copa de la Liga and beating Vélez in the Trofeo de Campeones, as you said, going pretty well this season. They're going to be a tough team to break down. They've got Acasibar is really rejuvenated back at Estudiantes. He's a really big player for them. Palacios as well, creative midfielder. And they've got some good solid centre-backs as well, like Sebastian Boselli is a really good young Uruguayan centre-back who I really rate. It's a shame that he never really got the chance at River Plate. But I think that they're a team that could definitely catch a few teams out, and I'm not tipping them to go super far, but I think they've got a decent chance of having a little run here. So they're definitely going to be an interesting team to watch, that's for sure.
Do you think that, before we move on to Group B, do you think that they could potentially finish top of this group ahead of Botafogo?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. They're capable of beating anyone on their day, and like you said, you often get surprises early doors. Teams take a bit of time to warm up. The fact that the Brazilian teams have only had state championships, often means they come in maybe not quite firing on all cylinders. So Estudiantes, with a bit, 10 games or so of the Argentinian league already gone, they're into a bit of a rhythm. It wouldn't surprise me. I think the fact that realistically, the wonderfully named Carabobo and Universidad de Chile probably aren't gonna cause them too many issues means that they might just not really get out of fourth gear and just kind of cruise through without really having to worry too much, and that can bring a bit of complacency. So new faces bedding in, Estudiantes a much more settled side. They've added quality to their team, but they've still got that really solid base, and they've got good options. So yeah, I think it'll be between Botafogo and Estudiantes for top two. I think it's one of the more straightforward groups.
Yeah, and it's funny how you should bring up how the Brazilian season is just starting this weekend, because in round one in 2024, no Brazilian team won their first game. So it's only a couple of days. The game starts Saturday, Sunday, and then it's Tuesday for the Libertadores, where Argentinian teams can probably rest a few players because they know where they are in the league, where Brazil is like Flamengo, for example, or Internacional, and then straight away into an away game in Venezuela. So interesting that they're a little bit leggy. I know these state cups are taken seriously, but I'm a little bit on the fence whether they are or not until maybe the final at least. But look, let's move across to Group B. More intriguing, I think, this one. So we have Argentina's semi-finalists last year, River Plate, Independiente del Valle, Barcelona, who came through the qualifiers after beating Corinthians impressively, and Peruvian outfit Universitario. So let's start with River Plate, who are expected to top this group. It may not be as simple as that, but what's your thoughts on River Plate? Because they've spent a lot of money in the off-season and they've shored up defensively, but again, going forward, there's a lot left to be desired at the moment, and maybe this will catch them out with those couple of trips to Ecuador. They're not the easiest of places to go, as Corinthians found out. They should progress. They should be in top place, but will they, Tom?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, as you said, you look through their squad, and okay, there are a lot of names that maybe were at their peak 4 or 5 years ago, but the quality and the experience in there is pretty mad for certainly for Argentinian football in the current economic state. But for all the Acuna, Montiel, Martinez Cuarta, all the names in there, certainly in the defensive aspect, you do feel that it's kind of almost Gallardo getting the old band back together again and maybe lacking that energy and dynamism. And they should be a lot better going forward. River fans really not that impressed with Borja at the moment. Driussi hasn't really hit his form yet, but there's definite chance there because he's still a very good player at this level. So they've kind of almost been reliant on Colilio, who's not really an out-and-out goal scorer. I think the signing of Kevin Castaño is going to be interesting because he might be that guy who can really be like the boss in the middle of the field and get that energy levels up. But they've invested very heavily in him, and you kind of think that has to work. So I think the thing with the league form as well, and the general vibe around River is, they've got that just ridiculous level to try and live up to under the first time Gallardo was there. So it's going to be difficult because Brazilian teams have got stronger since then. But I think maybe the one thing that kind of should give them a little bit of hope is when it comes to league form, Gallardo is famously kind of seen that as playing second fiddle to Libertadores. For many clubs in South America, Libertadores is all that matters. And it's certainly true when it comes to River as well. So the focus is all going to be on that. They might be putting all their eggs in that basket. And, we have to mention as well, the young players they've got coming through. Mastantuono is the obvious one who everyone's, desperate to see more of. And he looks like a real player. And obviously Ian Subiabre as well was very good for the under-20s at the Sudamericano. So, yeah, there's some good talent there. They're going to be an interesting team to watch. But, yeah, as you said, those two Ecuadorian sides particularly could really make it quite difficult. And yeah, it wouldn't be surprised if they struggled through this group. I really think that it's going to be difficult for them.
Yeah, let's focus on those. So, like I said previously, Barcelona came through the qualifiers where sometimes that can be at a disadvantage, but Botafogo did it last year. So maybe we're not speaking out of turn there. They are the underdogs in this group, even according to the bookmakers, for basically Independiente del Valle. I think maybe more so on their name as second favourites because they've had a hit and miss start to their campaign. But if you go through their team, a lot of their youngsters, and obviously Independiente del Valle are a team who want to produce youngsters and sell them and export them to Europe. But they lost 3 or 4 big names last season. Kendry Pye is the obvious one who's gone to Chelsea early in order to prepare him, probably move away from the nightclubs and everything he's been getting involved with. But he's gone across to Chelsea a little bit earlier. Yeimar Medina, who's gone to Genk, and then the big name Kenny Arroyo, who's gone to Besiktas. 3 young players, but who started within the 11, and then João Ortiz has moved to Portland Timbers as well. Now, you can look, and Barcelona and Del Valle have played already this season, and Del Valle came out on top 4-0. But if you look beneath the surface, Barcelona had a man sent off within the first 10 minutes, so we can take it slightly out of context. And what I like about Barcelona is, and it's quite intriguing, so first of all, Segundo Castillo, the manager, who wore that unbelievable white tux for that first leg against Corinthians. Good job he won 3-0, because if he'd lost that after wearing that, it would have been quite something. But he's only been interim manager twice, once for 5 games, once for 1 game, which he won last year. But now he's been given a chance, and he started the season really strongly and obviously got them over the line against Corinthians, who are expected to finish in the top 2, 3, maybe even first place in Brazil this season. So they're in a good place. Independiente del Valle in a slight transitional period. If you had to pick a name, Tom, I know I've set it up for a Barcelona answer, but if you had to pick a name to join River, who would you fancy?
I don't know. I think with Independiente del Valle, it's still that. I mean, they're a bit of a hipster favourite, let's be honest. And I hold my hands up and say that I'm very much a big fan of theirs. And I think that, everything you've said is spot on, because they are going through a transitional phase. They because of the kind of model of the club, they always are kind of going through a transitional phase. So that's why I kind of back them to deal with that loss of those young players. They've still got some good older heads in there. Sornosa has been knocking around for ages. Renato Ibarra, Jackson Mendes, Juanito Casares is good. Patrick Mercado, good defensive midfielder too. So I think there's quality there, and there's always quality ready to rise from the youth ranks. I mean, I think that they will probably just edge Barcelona. But again, it will be tight. And I think the thing with Independiente del Valle as well is for all the hype around them and the praise, rightly so, for their the way their club is organised and their youth development. We're used to them in the Libertadores now, but they don't often get that far. I think everyone kind of expects them to match that 2016 tournament, but they rarely, I think they've got. I'm not sure if they've got past the round of 16 since that.
They didn't get out of the group tournament last year.
Yeah, and often. I mean, they've had some tough groups in the past. To be fair, they've been sort of screwed over a little bit by the draw, and maybe just that consistency now is giving them a slightly better slot in there. But I don't know. I don't know why, but I think I'm still leaning more towards IDV. Barcelona, just without Damian Diaz, I'm just, I'm not sure. But they do have goals. Rivero and Corozo scored a lot of goals last season. Joao Rojas, player I've always liked since Emelec days as well. So I think that first game is going to be huge. Home form is going to be massive for Barcelona. That stadium in Guayaquil is a great stadium. They do very well there. So I think if they get a good marker down early, set the tone against IDV, and if they can capitalize on their home form, which realistically so many teams, if you want to get a chance of getting through, you need to be winning probably your 3 home games and seeing if you can pick up a point on the road somewhere along the way. 10 points is probably going to get you through most groups, sometimes less. So, I think if Barcelona can really capitalise on that home form, they've got a really good chance.
It's a mini competition in itself between the Ecuadorian teams. Let's move across to Group C, where it's probably one team we're going to talk about quite in depth here, but we have the massive Brazilian team, obviously in Flamengo, Liga de Quito from Ecuador, Deportivo Táchira from Venezuela, and then another Argentinian side in Central Cordoba. Flamengo, very interesting to see them under Filipe Luis. He's been unbelievable. Nobody expected this when he first came in. He's only been in charge 6 months. He's picked up 3 trophies. He's lost 1 in 24 games. He's kept something stupid like 15, 16 clean sheets. Flamengo are famously a slow starter. They normally don't do particularly well in the state cups, but they won it. They've come into this in good form. They have done this all without Pedro as well, who's been out injured for a very long time. And Filipe Luis finished the season very strongly last year when Flamengo didn't look like they were going to really achieve anything. And they were the team many people were talking about, even though they didn't win the title. Filipe Luis, I mean, look, thank God Brazil finally have a young manager to sort of look to, because they don't have anybody else at the moment. So maybe he's being put in the spotlight a little bit more. But he was meant to come in just to see the team out to the end of the season. But the board have put a lot of trust in him, and he's done absolutely fantastic, hasn't he? So my question to you is, they probably will top this group. But my question to you is, and we'll do further predictions later down the line in this podcast, but are Flamengo the worthy favourites? Are they the team to beat?
I don't know about if they'd be my top favourites. I'd probably have them in the top 2 or 3. But like you said, the form has been excellent, but we know things can turn quite quickly. And ultimately, the importance of the Libertadores can really put paid to a lot of the good work you do. I mean, I think he'll be fine. I agree. He looks like a really promising managerial prospect, and I think that a good run in the Libertadores could really cement that. I've just been interested by what a quiet window it's been for them. Really, you know, they've got rid of a few bigger names, but apart from Danilo coming in on a free, it seems like he's really sticking to that core, which I think again is a good sign that he kind of knows his squad well. He's going to deal with what he's got there. They've got some good young players coming through. They've just won the under-20 Libertadores as well, so there's a good base of talent coming up as well. And, I think they're going to be sort of a very, very strong contender in this tournament. I mean, I will say that they've probably got some sort of low-key, difficult away games in this group. I think, they're going to be fine. But, Quito, you've got a little bit of altitude up there, and LDU are, again, really, really good side at the moment. I think, potentially the strongest of all the Ecuadorians. Central Cordoba, if you've ever been to Santiago del Estero, it can get very hot there, and, people have been caught out. And, going up to Venezuela is never as easy as you usually think it might be. So, I don't think they'll have it all their own way, but yeah, this it looks like a pretty solid route to the knockout stages, and then we'll see what they're properly made of.
It's a lazy pick to say the favourites are going to do well. I think the thing is here is that there's expectations on Flamengo to win the treble every season, and the further they progress with the Copa do Brasil, how they are in Serie A, and then obviously Copa Libertadores as well, that fixture list is just so congested in the final 2 or 3 months. We saw Botafogo basically on their knees as they were getting across the line, playing every 2 or 3 days, and that could be the case with Flamengo. And as we saw when Pedro got injured last season, like, they didn't have an answer. They've brought in Juninho from Karabag. I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly how he performs. Maybe he's happy to come in and maybe play second fiddle, and Bruno Henrique is sort of, even despite turning 34 and moving into 35 this year, he's sort of, in this last 2 or 3 months, he's shown what he was like pre his serious injury 2 seasons ago. So maybe the fact that they've got rid of Gabriel Barbosa and he's out of the spotlight now, and they've got in players who want to be a team, there's going to be something there for them. But they've come into this very strong, and I think there's so much excitement around the manager. Be very interesting. But yeah, a short price, I think it's worthy. But as you said, anything can happen in the Libertadores. So let's move across to Group D. We'll do predictions towards the end, so do stay tuned for those. Group D, rather interesting little group here. Brazilian Sao Paulo, Paraguayan outfit Libertad, Alianza Lima from Peru, and Talleres from Argentina. How do you see this group playing out, Tom?
Yeah, this is probably one of my favourite groups on paper. I feel like it's pretty well balanced. I mean, Sao Paulo are obviously a big name, but they're not necessarily like one of the biggest hitters among the Brazilians. And Talleres, again, maybe they're not the biggest name, but they have been extremely consistent and right up there challenging. So it feels like it's going to be tight. It might be quite low scoring, I think, as well. But there's a lot to like in the group. You've got two of probably the oldest strike forces in the tournament in Roque Santa Cruz and Oscar Cardozo for Libertad.
How are they still going? Every year, I'm like, one of them's going to retire. It's almost if they're being stubborn against each other, but it's so good to see, right?
It's like the Paraguayan Messi Ronaldo, driving
It
each
really
other
is.
on. And then, Alianza Lima, you've got, is it
Hernan Barcos.
Guerrero and Barcos, up front.
Yeah.
So they're probably pushing a combined age of about 80 as well. So it's
Barcos 40, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Guerrero 41. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got two very experienced. Let's put it that way. But yeah, no, I mean, you can't really look past Sao Paulo and Talleres. They will be probably for me the favourites. You've got Oscar back. That's a big name for the tournament. That's going to be interesting. And Lucas Moura still there as well, and being pretty effective. Ryan Francisco as well is a player who lit up the Copinha, and it'd be interesting to see if we see a little bit of him. And Talleres. They're a side I know really well. My wife is from Cordoba, so we go back and we've seen them play in the Kempes last season.
So you're going to be biased here. That's what I'm getting from this.
A little bit, they're not necessarily my my Cordoba club, but any club from Cordoba, I'm definitely biased towards. I was at their preseason training last season, and just they've got a really fantastic setup. They're, as I said, a very good, consistent side. I think there's like a slight frustration from sections of the fan base that even though they run very well, they make good profit on players, it's not necessarily something that's like reinvested into the squad to really push and go and win something. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place because they're doing well, they're qualifying regularly now for continental tournaments, but it's always with that kind of more business mindset. And notably their president, Andres Fassi, is someone who is more in favour of the reforms that we mentioned earlier as well. So I think they're going to be solid. Portilla in the centre of the park is now Colombia International. Botta's still got a bit of class in his boots. The Paraguayan Golazo, when I saw him live against Racing last year, just never stopped running. He was really impressive. Portilla in defence as well, absolute sicario of a centre back. I think it's just goals that they're lacking at the moment. Lots of guys who can hit a run of form, but no one who you can really hang your hat on. So, as I said, I think there's a chance for any of these games to go any which way. I think Alianza Lima put Boca out in the qualifiers, so write them off at your own cost, and they've got some pretty solid experienced guys in there, and some good depth across the squad. So it's a really hard one to pick. Definitely not one that I'd be brave enough to put any money on, but I think there's going to be intrigue in this right down to the final week.
I think we're going to see a couple more minutes on Sao Paulo. I think we're going to see a slightly different Sao Paulo this season in terms of who they've brought in. They've brought in Cedric from Arsenal, Southampton, and then on the other side they've loaned River Plate Enzo Diaz, and they've brought in Porto Wendell. They've brought him in centre back as well. So they've gone for they've sold a couple of midfielders and brought in more defenders, which I was scratching my head about. So having watched them, they've sort of lined up with a 5 at the back, but they're playing with wing backs, and they've sort of allowed Oscar to have a bit more of a free role in the middle. And then obviously they've pushed Lucas Moura into the more central striker role because he was the only one really scoring goals for them last season. I do like Andre Silva, the striker they brought in from Portugal the year before. I think that he'll get slightly more game time this season. Now he's finally settled into his new surroundings. Sometimes players need that 12-month period. What we'll see with Sao Paulo this year is Pablo Maia, who will eventually come back. He had a horrible injury which kept him out last season when loads of European teams were sniffing around him. He's had a good pre-season, started getting a few more minutes. So Pablo Maia combined with Oscar and Lucas Moura with a slightly more defensive-minded point of view. I think Sao Paulo could be a little bit underrated here. I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I think that they could progress. And they were unfortunate last season to be knocked out on penalties against Botafogo, who obviously went on to win it. So Sao Paulo, a tricky group, but I think they could surprise people and come out quite comfortably here at the top of the table. So that's my Brazilian bias. So I'll park it there for part one. Join us for part two as we go through the other side of the groups. And let's just hear it from our sponsors. Football fans and stat lovers, listen up. If you're serious about understanding the game and digging deeper into the numbers, you've got to check out Player Stats. It's the ultimate platform for both football stats and player data. With Player Stats, you can see every stat at a glance, so there's no more clicking or digging around. Whether you're tracking player performances, team stats, or just want to explore detailed player props, Player Stats makes it simple, fast, and comprehensive. And here's the best part. As a listener of this podcast, you can get 20% off your first month when you sign up with the code COPPER. That's right, full access to all leagues, players, and stats, now at an exclusive discount. Head over to playerstats.football, use the code COPPER, and start exploring today. Welcome back to part two, where we will continue with Group E, which is also very interesting and another really difficult group to work out. So, Tom, we have Racing from Argentina, Chile's Colo-Colo, Brazil's Fortaleza, and the wonderfully named Colombian side, Atletico Bucaramanga. Hopefully I've got that completely correct. Apologies if I haven't. Tom, let's start with Racing, Sudamericana winners. I really like the look of them. They obviously beat Botafogo over 2 legs in the Recopa. Obviously, Botafogo didn't have a manager at the time and they're a little bit all over the place, but still to go to the Nilton Santos and win was a huge result. And I think it will give them a lot of confidence heading into this particular tournament. I really like the look of Racing. I think out of all the Argentinian sides, I think they are my preferred to go furthest in this competition. I don't think the step up from, I think the Sudamericana in the latter stages have got a lot stronger because it's been filtered out with Brazilian teams as we get towards the latter stages of the competition. And Racing beat Cruzeiro quite comfortably in the final last season and knocked out Corinthians. And if you can't tell from me talking about Corinthians, I'm a big fan of them this season. So if you knock them out or you beat them, that's a huge tick for me. We'll get onto the other teams in the group in a minute. But Tom, Racing, are you as excited as I am, or are you going to sort of dampen the mood a little bit here?
No, I'm getting on the Racing train for sure. I think, yeah, like you said, a bit like with Sao Paulo in the other group. I think Racing could be one of the dark horses, if you want to call them that, for the tournament, because, as you said, the way they dispatched some Brazilian sides in high stakes games they're going to come into the tournament with a lot of confidence. And yeah, I agree. I think they're probably the Argentinian side with the best chance of going far. It's a very good balance to the team, a good age profile, and also I think something that can't really be ignored is they've got a really good core of players who came up through their youth system who are back at the club. You know, Zaracho, Zuccolini, Vieto's back there as well. I'm sure there's others that I'm missing as well, but those are the kind of obvious ones. And you throw in the likes of Nardoni, Sosa, Almenda. Martirena is a lovely fullback. I think he's been a really good pickup from Uruguay. And up front, Maravilla Martinez is in just a great vein of form at the moment. He was absolutely brilliant last year, and he's been pretty good so far as well. They've got all the good nicknames up front. They've got Adrian, Rocky Balboa as well. So
Unreal.
Maravilla and Rocky up front with Vieto. I think it's pretty good. You know, they've lost some Juanfer Quintero, obviously, and a couple of the other Colombian lads, but you know they've got a settled side, good manager who knows the club, and I think they've just got that team spirit, that know-how in knockout competitions, and yeah, they're a really good side to watch when they get going. So I think, yeah, Racing for me, a team that I'm really excited to see what they do in this tournament.
I think similar to Group B, there's going to be quite the battle for second place here between Fortaleza and Colo-Colo. Sorry if I'm doing Bucaramanga any sort of disjustice here, but Colo-Colo are a team who don't particularly thrive in this competition, struggle for goals year on year. Fortaleza, who, if you looked at the end of last season, they had the best home form in Brazil, a nice squad, a manager who's actually been there for 2 or 3 years now, which is unheard of in Brazil. But they haven't had like the best transfer window. David Luiz, probably the most eye-catching name, but how many games he's going to play, I'm quite surprised that he didn't hang up his boots. What do you make of potentially who's going to get second place here? Because I think there's flaws within Fortaleza's team, but solid at home. Colo-Colo, can they ever do it at this level? But they've got nice youngsters. I really like Vicente Pizarro. We spoke about him a few times on the podcast. And then they've got Lucas Capeda, who's had quite a solid start to the season, did okay for Chile during the international break. Can he sort of take the game by the scruff of the neck and win games for Colo-Colo in this sort of tournament? I'm not sure, but they do have a nice squad, but nice squads don't really get you far in this competition, do they?
Yeah, I think they were surprised quarterfinalists last year, and even though they did well against River, Chilean sides and Colo-Colo haven't tended to do that well. So I think that was kind of more the exception than the rule. They've got solid players, they've got experience. Vidal, obviously, Isla. I think Claudio Aquino's a really good pickup because he was absolutely brilliant for Vélez last year and a big reason why they've dropped off so much, which I'm sure we'll get onto. And I think Alacon as well is a good reinforcement. But yeah, without the likes of Carlos Palacios, Damian Pizarro up front, yeah, you struggle to see where the goals are going to come from. They're going to have to kind of share them about. And I think Fortaleza, they're kind of one of those probably underrated Brazilian sides that they're not the most eye-catching. They're not one of the historic teams, but they've been on the rise, making steady improvements over the last few years, and they're kind of a regular now in continental competition. So I think there's probably enough there, even if they're not, the best Brazilian squad out there. I think they've got some canny operators. Yago Pikachu, name aside, is a really good player. Lucero can find the back of the net. Gaston Avila on loan from Ajax as well is an interesting one there because he's been unlucky with injury. And I like Cohen Andrade as well. Probably the best Venezuelan in the under-20 Sudamericano as well. So you'd think Fortaleza would get through. I don't really give Bucaramanga much. Went a bit Spanish there, much chance. A lot of their kind of players were sort of in on loan. They've not really been able to do much in the window. They've got a few recognisable names in Christian Zapata, ex-AC Milan there. And a player that I am quite keen to see is Peñaranda, who's ex-Watford. Was super highly touted when he was young and just never lived up to expectations. So quite an eclectic squad there. And it's only their second ever Libertadores participation. But I kind of think that, as with any surprise team that does well in their league, they kind of then get picked apart a little bit, and loanees returning to their parent club and stuff like that. So it's probably between Fortaleza and Colo-Colo, and I'd probably tip the Brazilians.
Yeah, I'd have to side with you. Let's move across to Group F. The battle of the Nacionals, it seems. Nacional from Uruguay, Atletico Nacional from Colombia, Internacional from Brazil, and then Bahia also from Brazil. I want to start with Internacional, and I know we said we're going to leave predictions towards the end, but I think the way I'm going to passionately speak about Internacional here will probably suggest that they are my pick to win the Libertadores this time round. Really, I absolutely love the squad for so many reasons. I think if we look at last season, the way in which they finished fifth in the Brazilian league was a huge achievement because of the floods in the south of Brazil. They lost key players. Their stadium was flooded. The training ground was flooded. They had an awful start to the season, got knocked out of the early rounds of the Sudamericana. But the team rallied under their new manager, Roger Mercado, and performed miracles, went on a 16-17 game unbeaten run. They lost the last 3 or 4 games of the season because I think they just finally just run out of sort of energy, and fair enough to them. But for them to get back into the Libertadores from the position they were in was unbelievable, really. And I think if they hadn't have had those problems, they would have been competing for the title. And I think they will pick up a trophy this season, whether it is in Brazil or whether it is this Libertadores. And the reason why I like them so much is, again, if we focus on the spine of a team, they have Vital, who used to play for Shakhtar, Champions League experience, so tall, so athletic, one of the best centre-backs, very intelligent in Brazil. Alan Patrick in the middle, he's just an unbelievable sort of technician. He's so good. When he was out injured last season, this is when they went through a little bit of a dip, but perfect for goals and assists. Very reliable and loves the Libertadores. You have 2 unbelievable strikers for this level in Rafael Bora and Enner Valencia. Now, Enner Valencia was brought in 2 seasons ago where he'd scored 28 goals in 31 league games for Fenerbahce, was very strong in 2023 and almost carried them to the final. They got knocked out against Fluminense in the semi-final, so obviously went on to win it. And then last season, he was injured here and there, so he only scored 3 or 4 goals, but he's had a wonderful start to the campaign in the State Cups, scored a brace for Ecuador the other day as well. So he comes into the season in really good form. Wesley on the wing scored 11 in 33. There's just so much to like about them. And I just think that they were so solid last season, and how they rallied and came together under terrible circumstances to almost achieve something incredible and keep that squad together. They've only lost 1 or 2 players. Carvalho, the youngsters, obviously another one to go to Saudi, which is a shame. But aside from him, they've added a little bit of quality. They've brought in Celtic's Bernabé, who was on loan last season and got into the Brazilian team of the year. They signed him for 6-7 million, and there's just quality all over the pitch, and there's options to change it as well in terms of they play 4-5-1 with the strikers. So whether it is Borre or Valencia, for example, and for me, I can't look beyond them getting further down the line in this competition, especially when you look at the odds as well, 10, 11 to 1, one of the outsiders for the Brazilian teams, when I think they're the most complete, is a bit of a head scratcher for me. So there's my International rant. There's my first major prediction. I do really like them. Anything you'd like to add about this group, Tom, before I keep talking about International? Because Bahia are an interesting team within this group as well.
I think you've said everything, and you've made a very passionate case for them. Like, you're definitely someone who's watched more than me. So I think, like, I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to sit up and take notice of this team now. But looking through their squad, like you said, I like that there is good options all over the pitch. Yes, if they were to lose one of their key members of the spine, perhaps that could be the only type of thing that would derail them. But I think there's players who could step in and sort of keep things going. So yeah, I think it's probably more just down to, like, the biases you have around teams, right? Internacional, obviously a huge club in Brazil, but maybe they don't have quite the same resonance as Corinthians, Flamengo, Palmeiras, these kind of, inverted commas, bigger clubs. So yeah, I think it would be good to see them go far, and I think they should be comfortable in what is still a difficult group.
I'm just looking at traditions as well. Like Fluminense were huge outsiders when they won it in 2023. Botafogo as well. And you look at the squads and how they're performing 2 or 3 months in the lead up to the season's beginning. They were all on a trajectory, and that's where International are already. And they've got such experience in this tournament as well. And their home grounds, 50 to 51,000 capacity. Like, they fill that for the big games. And I always think if you've got a good manager, good squad, and a stadium which can really intimidate your opposition, I think you're onto a winner. And I know you said there if they get 1 or 2 injuries, but you could say that about most squads, couldn't you? If you lose this player here, if you lose that player. So I tried to put that to one side, but I just think they've been really sort of undervalued here, and they're the same price as Sao Paulo, maybe because Sao Paulo, like, again, bigger name, they've brought in Oscar, but for me there's too much quality there for International. So they're my pick to win the Libertadores this year. I'm trying to get 3 in a row, so apologies if I don't. But let's move across to Group G. Another huge favourite, another big club, Palmeiras from Brazil, Bolivar from Bolivia, Peru's Sporting Cristal, and then Paraguay's Cerro Porteño. I think the obvious place to start here is with Abel Ferreira's Palmeiras, who have thrown so much money at their squad. Very angry that obviously they didn't pick up any trophies last season, and they spent close to $100 million, I believe, on players. They brought in Paulinho from Mineiro for 16 million, who 6 million euros that is, who hasn't even played a game yet because he's been injured. The big names, obviously Vitor Roque, 25 million from Barcelona. They've brought in so many attacking players. I'm a little bit worried about that they have worried about the defence, almost if they're trying to outscore teams, because Vitor Reis is a huge name to replace, and I don't think they have. So I think the imbalance of the squad, I think this is almost, we've seen this in Europe, haven't we, with so many teams before, where just because you open the checkbook and you buy the best players for your squad, I've not even mentioned Facundo Torres, there's a list of players here with Palmeiras, but have they bought smart? Have they bought areas which they needed to improve? I think there's a few question marks, especially from a defensive point of view. And if I go back to my argument for Flamengo, in terms of they're expected here to compete in Brazil for the league, Copa do Brazil, and the Libertadores, and it gets to a point where they're not going to win all three. So maybe it won't be the Libertadores, but Tom, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree about the distribution of where they've invested. It really feels like it's almost been a conscientious effort from Ferreira to kind of rebuild this team. He's been there so long now, which is just so rare in South American football. And you look at this team, and okay, there's still Rafael Veiga, Gustavo Gomez, and Weverton, but it's a really different team, with likes of Honigon and Menino too. It's going to be interesting to see if he can, sort of go again with this very much a new look team. I still think that there's so much quality there that, maybe they think, you know what, let's get off to a good start in the league and get through the group stage, which they've traditionally been very comfortable at getting through the groups. And this looks like another one that shouldn't cause them any significant problems. And then you kind of see Ferreira switch and go a little bit more pragmatic, a little bit more defensively. So maybe they're just kind of thinking, okay, we'll wait until the midpoint and strengthen in defence at that point, because it does seem quite out of character for him to go this attacking. We know that their team can blow opponents away, but I think the way they've kind of handled the knockout rounds has often been a little bit tighter. I mean, I do think the likes of Emiliano Martinez, not that one, coming in at defensive midfield, and also Michael as well, in from Houston Dynamo. He has been very good in MLS. So I think that you look at him and Gomez in the centre, that's still a solid thing. You're kind of hoping that the likes of Agustin Jai and people like that sort of, and Piqueres sort of step up and provide it. But yeah, I definitely agree that it's not a perfect blend in the squad, but I don't know. I just feel like, unfortunately, in this case, maybe money will talk.
It's going to go one way or the other, isn't it? But to throw a few more negative statements around Palmeiras, I worry about the fullback area. I think defensively they're so exposed. I'm surprisingly not a Richard Rios fan. I don't like him in that defensive role. I think he has to be in a 2. But when he's isolated, his defensive stats aren't the best. I think he can get caught out as well. So there's 2 or 3 holes in the defense. And also, all these big names you brought in, Torres, Paulinho, Vitor Roque, Esteval until he departs. I think that's quite a big one to mention as well when he leaves in June, July. How would you keep them all happy? Like, I know there's multiple games, multiple competitions, but Vitor Roque hasn't come to sit on the bench. But if he doesn't score in a few games, does he switch it? But Ferreira has been so stubborn over the years. I mean, he didn't even want to play Endrick a couple of seasons ago until right till the very end. So it's going to be interesting how he manages all these sort of big personalities. They spent a lot of money. All the players come in will expect to play. And I think, yes, you said there they always comfortably progress out of the group. I think I'm speaking a little bit further down the line. But I worry for them. I think their expectations will be too high on them. And they're either going to win everything or it's going to fall flat on their face. Clearly, I've gone towards the negative side of things here. But yes, they will progress out of the group. But for me, the other contenders in this group makes it very interesting. Bolivar, Sporting Cristal, and Cerro Porteño. Bolivar, who qualified in first place last season, previously had beaten Cerro Porteño 4-0 away on the road, which is a huge deal for a Bolivian club. They only ever need to get that one away victory to qualify. But I know there's no the strongest this year, but we have Bolivar, who have seemingly improved. They brought in Robinson Mateus from Always Ready, who scored 10 league goals last season, 22, quite eye-catching. And at home, I mean, when Brazilian teams go away against Bolivian teams, they often put a reserve team out. We've seen it for so many years in a row now. Palmeiras they always seem to play Bolivar and Cerro Porteño in one way or form. But last time they went to Bolivar was opening game. They took a reserve team there. Bolivar beat them 3-1. The strongest beat Fluminense 1-0 the year they won it. There's all these little games where Brazilian teams go, do you know what? We'll hand over the 3 points and we just want to worry about getting our points at home and other places because there's 18 points to play for. They'll be fine. That hands a huge advantage to Bolivar, but probably frustrates the other teams here. I'm very hot on Bolivar. I like their team. They've got a nice Brazilian mix as well. They seem to be growing in confidence in the Libertadores now. I think now they've reached the knockout stage a couple of years in a row. They sense opportunities here, and when they beat Cerro Porteño away 4-0, off the top of my head, I can't remember if that was last season or the year before now, but that would have given them so much confidence that, do you know what, we can play well on the road as well. And if we just pick up that one win, we're going to progress and go through. So Bolivar are my pick here. Tom, agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, I like Bolivar. I think, yeah, as you said, they've shown now that they're not just relying on the home form. They've got some good players there. I mean, Rocha, the right back, is someone who I'm a big fan of. Pass is a good defender as well. You know, they've got some good internationals in midfield as well as those, you know, that bit of class up front with the Brazilians. So yeah, I mean, and if you've ever been to La Paz, you know what like how difficult it is just to walk around, let alone play a football match. So I have complete
You spent
sympathy.
some time there, right? Over
Yeah,
the last bit? Yeah.
I've been a couple of times, but I was there in September, and yeah, going up to El Alto, where the national team thought, you know what, we haven't quite got enough of an altitude advantage here.
Oh, I love
that.
know,
it was I don't know how anyone plays football there. I mean, you obviously try and get in as close to kick off and play through before you've been hit by it, or you go a week before and try and acclimatise. But yeah, it is just one of those brilliant sort of wrinkles of the Libertadores that make it like no other tournament, because it's just something that doesn't really come into it. But I think they probably will get through here. But Cerro Porteño, big traditional Paraguayan side, they've got some good players there. And Cristal, I think, probably out of the Peruvians, probably the side that I like the most. They've got a real nice mix all through the team. You've got the experience of Caltarucho, who's like a proper, tried and tested warhorse up front, with the likes of Avila, Iberico, Pacheco, and even the young prospect Max Lauren Castro as well. But yeah, you look through the midfield. There's some good players, and I think that they are capable of surprising some people. But the fact they are probably, unlike a lot of other clubs at this level, they've kind of backed youth traditionally, and I think when you're going up against Bolivar away, Palmeiras, and some rugged Paraguayans like Cerro Porteño, they might just ship a few too many goals to go through. But no, I mean, I just thought they deserved a mention because I've got a fair bit of time for Sporting Cristal, but I think all three teams will fancy it. But I think that home advantage is gonna count and see Bolivar through.
Absolutely, and I love to see him in the knockout stage because I know how much it annoys a lot of Brazilian clubs as well, but it makes it so much more fun, right?
Yeah.
Group H, we've made it, and within the hour as well, which is quite impressive. And this group, well, you said it earlier about you didn't know where to put your money on. This group is very baffling to me on the surface. You've got Uruguayan outfit Penarol, Olympia from Paraguay, Vélez, Argentina, and Copa Libertadores debutants San Antonio Bulo Bulo. What a wonderful name. It's very hard to find if you don't watch Bolivian football and if your Spanish isn't very good with translating articles. It's very hard to find out too much about them. It's going to be very interesting to see if they either scrape any wins or if they lose 6-7-0. I think they'll count their blessings that they haven't come up against a Brazilian team in the group. We'll talk about them a little bit towards the end. But the rest, it's really hard, Tom. I can't work. I've looked at this group and I've been scratching my head and I just can't work out who's going to be going through here. You've got Penarol, who were last year's semi-finalists, who have won 1 in 8 at the start of the season. I'm not sure what's going on there. And I believe they have to play 1 or 2 games behind closed doors because of what happened with Botafogo last year and with the fans. So straight away, that's a huge advantage taken away. Olympia and then Vélez. Talk to me, Tom, because I'm just going to be and ahhing it because I'm finding it very confusing. This seems to be the impossible group minus Bula Bula.
Yeah, no, I think it might be one of the lower quality groups. I mean, if you'd asked me, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, then I would have been all over Vélez as the Argentinian team to watch. They're not just because they're probably the team that's got my greatest sympathy, but they were the best team in Argentina last year, won the league, missed out in the final of the Copa de la Liga, the Copa Argentina as well. You know, they almost had the treble, but even that didn't take away from what a fantastic side they were. But then manager left, Sebastián Domínguez came in, and I think they went 7 or 8 games without even scoring a goal, let alone picking up anything. I think the one goal they got was in the Copa Argentina against some lower division side, and that was a penalty. So no open play goals. Yeah. So, but to be fair, they've now got Gustavo Barrejequeloto in, former Boca manager, former Paraguay, LA Galaxy manager, and they seem to be turning a corner. I think they just really went through a tough period of losing a few of their best players. So Aquino being sold, Thiago Fernandez, the young Argentinian left winger, out with an ACL, so not having him available. And then their captain and sort of star centre back Valentin Gomez had this big transfer saga where Foster Gillette had bought him, but then didn't pay Vélez and didn't register him, and he was literally, he was in Udinese ready to sign, and then had to come back. Was just like couldn't even train with the team. Was just like in a park trying to keep fit and just having a really terrible time. Basically, all those guys sort of not available at the start of the season, and realistically, just Brian Romero, who's a very hot and cold striker, left. So yeah, they're definitely weakened. They haven't really brought in anyone. But the one thing you can always say for Vélez is they've got an absolutely brilliant youth set up. So, as well as Fernandez and Gomez, who we've mentioned, Ordóñez at the base of midfield is someone who's now consistently been performing for a while and been linked to a few European clubs. Maher Carrizo was very good for the under-20s and looks like a real talent up front. And then they've got this young 17-year-old winger, Alvaro Montoro, who's just exactly what you'd expect like a 17-year-old winger to be. Just loves a dribble, and is someone who I think will start to get a few eyes on him as well. So I think they've been lucky that this group isn't the highest quality, but because they've been so poor, I now wouldn't be confident in saying that they will get through. But if they can pick up a bit as the group goes on, they're more than capable of topping this group, because I think Peñarol, last year's semi-finalists, bit of a surprise run considering how poor they'd been in probably the 10 previous editions. I think Peñarol, it's basically all on Leo Fernandez.
So
They
good.
spent a lot of money on him. Brilliant player. But other than that, you kind of think, there's not too much. They're pretty second best to Nacional on the domestic front last year, and Olympia, they've got they've got some interesting names in there. Derlis Gonzalez, I've always liked. Benedetto, who knows? Prato, ex Velez, so there's going to be a bit of a return home for him. And people like Rodney Redes, Richard Artis, Lisandro Lopez, the ex Boca and Benfica defender, not the striker. So they've got like quite an eclectic team, but
they're quite chaotic. I've watched them only a couple of times this season, and it's just more like a hockey match or a basketball match than anything, and that never really bodes well on the Libertadores. And
no.
Touching on Penarol, as you said there, Leonardo Fernandez scored 16 league goals in 33 games last season. In the Libertadores, 3 goals and 6 assists in 12 games. Everything went through him, and he just lit up in the Libertadores, as cheesy as that is. But he hasn't scored this season, and that's why they've only won 1 in 8. And that's really worrying. And the fact that they don't play in front of a crowd, I think that's such a massive sort of weakness for them. And they've lost a couple of key players as well. Damian Garcia, who was heavily linked with the move to Rangers, as Shock ended up in the Middle East, and without him in the middle, it sort of maybe affected Fernandez's game. And Washington Aguirre, if that's right, in between the sticks. Yeah, he's the one. He's moved on as well. I can't remember where he's gone, but I think he was so crucial in those 2 games against Flamengo, and the fact that like you said there, yes, they somehow got to the semi-finals. I think they were solid, but they played a Flamengo side who were sort of in decline, and obviously they didn't have Pedro either, and they just heavily relied on him. So I think you can take last year's result with a pinch of salt, and this is almost the impossible group. But when we say impossible group, we probably know Bulo are going to finish bottom, and a bit of context around them, because if you go to the Wikipedia page to try and find anything out about this team, you will find nothing. But Bulo, first time ever been in the Libertadores. 2023 was the first time that they'd ever been promoted into the top flight in Bolivia. Their logo is... This is something the Sweeper podcast should pick up. The logo is pretty much like Brazil's, with a big sort of Antichrist on the front, which is unbelievable. But the reason why they're here is because when they got promoted, they won Bolivia's sort of cup competition at the start of the season, beating Bolivar along the way, and sort of, I don't want to say fluked the way to the final, but because I only saw a couple of games or highlights around the Bolivar game, because I was very surprised by that. But look, they've ended up in the Libertadores, and another Bolivian team are there, and they won't be playing their home games at their home stadium due to regulation, but it will still be in altitude. It's going to be very interesting to see how they perform at home. I know very little about them or their team. Tom, do you know anything you'd like to add around them, or are we just excited to see another Bolivian team in the Libertadores?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, like we've talked about, how Bolivian teams bring so much to it, and this is kind of the other side of it as well, where South Americans football's consistent ability still to surprise you. Like even us who watch too much South American football, we can still get caught out by these teams that you've like literally never heard of, and then they qualify. I mean, I think you probably know as much, if not more, than me, because I didn't even realize they were playing in a different stadium, because I don't think like where they're based in Chirias and Cochabamba is actually that high. So maybe they've thought, you know what, actually, if we can get up to some altitude, we might have a better chance here. But yeah, I mean, the Bolivian league is such a hard one to even kind of keep tabs on, let alone watch, because there's so little information out there. It's a bit of a black hole, to be honest. And
a fair bit of corruption as well, which never really helps.
Massively.
So,
there's this big scandal with a player who's been, who's basically faked how old he is, and Aurora getting a 33-point deduction, and the league hasn't even started yet. A couple of teams, I think, gone out of business completely. So, it's very chaotic over
it's
there.
Fun to lift the lid off, though. Like I did that. I wrote a piece for the Blizzard, and I spoke to a couple of journalists from obviously that region. And I thought I was on the call for like professional interviews, but they were laughing as they were telling me all the fixed results from phone calls as it is. So it's very interesting to watch or read about as and when you can. Like you said, this was limited information, but if you do get involved in Bolivian football, it can be very interesting. And like I've already brought the sweeper pod, but some stories I'm sure on Bula Bula will be appearing on that podcast closer to the time. Lovely place to sort of wrap up the podcast. But before we go, we have to do our winners. I'm going to do surprise package, biggest disappointment, and maybe top goal scorer or player to watch. So, Tom, I think everyone knows my winners. International are my winners for this year. Who do you fancy to pick up the trophy?
You know what? I mean, you almost convinced me, but I'm gonna play it kind of safe and say I think Palmeiras are gonna get it together with a little slight hat tip to Racing potentially being, you know, out of the other teams, non-Brazilian teams, the best of the rest, shall we say?
Yeah. I sort of answered two of them on there because my surprise package, I have put Racing down. And I've put slash Bolivar because I think that they can potentially get to the last eight. But yeah, I think Racing are going to be the team to surprise a few. Biggest disappointment, Tom?
Biggest disappointment. I mean, I think it speaks a lot to, you know, the expectation that's there. So I think it might actually be River Plate. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily gonna have a terrible tournament, and I'm hopeful they can, make me eat humble pie. But I think there'll be some really, really high expectations based on what they've done in the transfer window, and I just have a feeling that it's just not going to quite work out for them, unfortunately.
I was contemplating writing River Plate down, but I spoke so negatively about Botafogo. I've put them down as my biggest disappointment. Maybe finishing second in the group, and then that can catch them out in the first knockout round. But I think we're going to see quite a poor Botafogo across the board in 2025. I spoke quite openly about that. I've written quite openly about that. So again, I could be eating humble pie with the amount I've gone in on Botafogo, but I think they will be the biggest disappointment. Last question, I'll throw it to you. You can answer either or both. I put top goal scorer or player to watch.
Ooh, that is a
It's a tough one, isn't it?
a tough one. Yeah,
I can lead if
it's
you
just,
want why you think.
yeah, you go for it, Lee. I mean, give me some thinking time.
So the two names I've gone for, it's pretty obvious. If I think Internacional and I think Racing are going to get further in the tournament, I've got Enner Valencia. I think he will replace Rafael Borre to lead the line. And I've also put Adrian Martinez, obviously top goal scorer in Sudamericana. I just like how he operates. I think he's so deadly in the box and like he's such a handful for defenders. So if Racing are going to surprise a few teams and go forwards, Martinez is your man. But if a player to watch, I've already brought him up, but Pablo Maya, I think people have almost forgotten about how good he was. So if he can recover really well from that injury, as he's shown good signs already, I think he could probably take Sao Paulo, I was going to say really far, quite far in this tournament. Tom,
Yeah,
you've had
I
some
think
time
there's some sound logic there. So I guess if I'm going for Palmeiras, then I've got to say Vitor Roque. I mean, I do love him as a player.
now.
I'm disappointed that it's not worked out better in Europe because I think he does have the quality there. So I'm gonna really hedge my bets on that. But I think that in terms of like maybe player to watch and certainly given that you've done a good job of talking up Sao Paulo. I think Oscar is going to be a really big player for them, and I think he's going to be one of the names to watch and just someone who the tournament's going to be better having him in it. And then other than that, I think Luciano Rodriguez at Bahia is
Yes.
is someone who could have a really good tournament. I think he's someone who could be playing at a higher level already. And yeah, I think him, and who knows if we're gonna throw in some like Bahia players to watch, then they've got two 16-year-olds, Del and Ruan Pablo, who we often see like a young player come in and score when they're like 17, 16, 17. I think if there's going to be like a stupidly young teenage breakthrough, then we might see one of those two doing something.
I've seen you posting about Dell before, so I did think that you were going to bring this to the podcast, but what a nice way to sign off. And we've wrapped it all up in 67, 68 minutes, which we've done pretty good there for the groups. And hopefully we've brought a few winners, or we can brag about this in 10 months' time. But Tom, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and drop us a rating. Tom, we'll get you back on later on in the season, but thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk Libertadores, and look forward to seeing how woefully wrong that we might have been.